Welcome back to Swift Tale, the place where real-life drama, high-stakes emotion, and powerful life lessons come together in stories that remind us just how unpredictable the world can be. And if this is your very first time joining us, welcome to the family, and let me ask you a quick question. Have you subscribed yet? If not, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that challenge perspectives and spark conversation. Today's story is one that cuts deep, a story about dedication, urgency, and the heartbreaking consequences of assumptions made in the span of a single moment. It begins with a renowned black doctor, still in his scrubs, racing against time to reach an operating room where a patient's life hangs by a thread. Every second counts, every footstep matters. But before he can get through the hospital doors, he is suddenly stopped, confronted, and ultimately arrested by two officers who see him not as a healer rushing to save a life, but as a suspicious man running toward a building. What they don't ask, what they don't bother to understand, and what they completely fail to realize is that the person lying unconscious on that operating table is the hospital director's wife, a woman with minutes left to live, and the very doctor they are detaining is the only surgeon capable of performing the critical procedure that might save her. This isn't just a story about a wrongful arrest. It's about what happens when prejudice collides with urgency, when authority overrides reason, and when the truth arrives too late to undo the damage already done. It asks us to look deeper into the moments where a single decision can change the course of multiple lives. So settle in, because today's tale is emotional, intense, and painfully eye-opening, a reminder that human life should never be jeopardized by assumptions, and that the people we overlook or underestimate might be the very ones holding the world together. Let's begin this journey and see how one doctor's race against time turns into a fight not only for his patient's life, but for his dignity, his reputation, and his right to simply do the job he dedicated his life to. Dr. Malik Turner wasn't just any surgeon. He was the kind of physician whose presence could calm a crowded emergency room, whose steady hands had saved lives that other doctors had already counted out. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood where access to healthcare was often a luxury, Malik grew up watching neighbors suffer through illnesses that could have been prevented with the right medical attention. That childhood reality carved a mark so deep inside him that becoming a doctor wasn't just a career dream. It became a mission stitched into his identity. He was the first in his family to step foot into medical school, grinding through long nights, balancing multiple jobs, and pushing himself through exhaustion because he knew the communities he came from needed doctors who cared. Those struggles shaped his reputation, compassionate, disciplined, and unwavering in his dedication to patients others might overlook. It was this same dedication that brought him to St. Augustine Medical Center, a hospital known for its fast-paced environment and overwhelming patient load, exactly the kind of place Malik felt he was meant to be. Colleagues respected him, nurses trusted him, and patients adored him because he saw them as people, not cases. And though he carried the weight of countless stories on his shoulders, he never let it slow him down. Every shift, every emergency, every frantic call reminded him why he chose this life. Today was no different. When the call came that a patient was crashing and needed immediate surgical intervention, Malik didn't hesitate. He didn't stop to rest, didn't stop to think, didn't even stop to grab a coat. He simply ran. Because for him, being a doctor wasn't about prestige or titles. It was about being there in the exact moment when someone needed him most. Little did he know that this moment, driven by pure duty, would be the moment that altered everything. The moment Dr. Malik Turner stepped out of the consultation room, he felt a familiar vibration against his hip, his pager going off in the rapid, urgent pattern reserved only for the most critical emergencies. He didn't even need to look at the ID number to know what it meant. A code blue in the surgical wing. His heart tightened. Code blue wasn't just a routine alert. It meant someone was losing the fight for life, slipping fast, and needed immediate intervention. Malik grabbed the device anyway, scanning the message as he moved, recognizing the patient's name in a single glance. It was the woman who had been brought in less than an hour ago, pale and barely breathing, her condition deteriorating with terrifying speed. She required surgery, complex, delicate, and time-sensitive, and Malik was the only available surgeon qualified to perform it. Without wasting a second, he rushed toward the entrance of the building he had been in for a quick consult, pushing through the heavy doors and sprinting across the hospital courtyard. He didn't stop to change or even catch his breath. He was already in his surgical scrubs, ready to step into the operating room the moment he arrived. The cold air slapped against his skin, but he barely felt it. His thoughts were consumed by the patient's dropping vitals, the frantic nurses preparing the OR, and the clock ticking mercilessly toward a point of no return. Every footstep felt like a countdown. He kept his eyes fixed on the hospital entrance, just ahead, so close he could already picture the bright lights of the surgical hallway. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have predicted, was that between him and that door stood an obstacle more dangerous than the medical crisis waiting inside. Two police officers who had no idea that the man racing past them wasn't running from trouble, but toward a life he might still be able to save. Just as Dr. Malik Turner reached the final stretch toward the hospital doors, he caught sight of two uniformed police officers standing near the entrance, scanning the area as if searching for someone. He didn't think much of it. Hospitals often had officers on site for security or ongoing cases. But as he sprinted forward, their heads snapped toward him with sudden intensity. In seconds, their attention locked onto him, not the scrubs he wore, not the hospital badge clipped to his waistband, not the medical urgency etched across his face. Only the movement, only the speed, only the assumptions. "Hey, stop right there," one of them barked, stepping directly into his path. Malik tried to maneuver around him, breathless but polite, blurting out, "I'm a surgeon, emergency call, I need to get inside right now." He didn't slow down, he couldn't. But the officer reacted faster, grabbing Malik's arm with unnecessary force, yanking him back as though he were a threat instead of a doctor fighting the clock. The second officer moved in, hand already hovering near his holster, eyes narrowed with suspicion rather than concern. "We said stop," he growled, ignoring the scrubs, the ID, and the desperation in Malik's voice. "What are you running for?" Malik's pulse pounded, not from exertion, but from disbelief. "A patient is crashing," he pleaded, pointing toward the entrance. "I'm the attending surgeon." "Let me go, please, she doesn't have much time." But the officers didn't listen. They exchanged a look that said they had already made up their minds. To them, he wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a man racing to save a life. He was someone to be detained first and questioned later. The seconds he needed to save his patient were slipping away, replaced by a confrontation he never imagined he'd face on the one day when time mattered most. The moment the officers tightened their grip, the situation spiraled faster than Dr. Malik Turner could process. He instinctively tried to pull his arm free, not to resist, but to gesture toward the doors where his patient lay dying, but the officers interpreted even that slight movement as defiance. "Stop resisting," one of them snapped, though Malik wasn't resisting at all. He raised both hands instinctively, palms open, voice trembling with urgency rather than fear. "I'm not resisting. I'm a surgeon, please, you're costing someone their life." But the officers weren't listening. They were operating on assumption, on adrenaline, on the dangerous belief that force came before facts. The first officer shoved him against the stone wall near the entrance, the rough surface scraping his cheek as metal clinked behind him. His badge slipped from his waistband onto the concrete, but neither officer bothered to look at it. "We got a report of someone suspicious running around," the second officer said, as if the explanation justified everything. Malik's stomach sank. A suspicious person, that was all it took. His voice cracked with desperation. "I'm supposed to be in surgery. You don't understand. She's going to die if I don't get inside." A few bystanders nearby paused, watching with discomfort, but afraid to get too close. A nurse walking by recognized Malik and started toward them, calling out, "That's Dr. Turner. He's one of our surgeons." But the officers held up a hand aggressively, stopping her in her tracks. "Ma'am, step back. We're handling this." The cuff snapped shut around Malik's wrists. The cold metal bit into his skin. And in that moment, as they forced him down to sit on the curb like a criminal, Malik felt the terrible weight of helplessness sink into his bones. Every second he sat there, restrained and humiliated, was a second his patient was losing. Panic gnawed at him, not for himself, but for the woman whose life depended on him. And worst of all was the chilling realization that no matter what he said, no matter how much he pleaded, the officers had already decided who he was. Not a surgeon, not a man rushing to save a life, just a suspect, a threat, someone to control instead of someone to trust. Inside the hospital, The atmosphere was thick with tension. Nurses rushed in and out of the operating room, preparing equipment, adjusting monitors, and exchanging worried glances as the patient's vitals continued to plummet. The woman on the table, pale, motionless, her chest rising shallowly, was slipping further into crisis with every passing moment. "Where is Dr. Turner?" one of the nurses demanded, her voice rising in frustration as she checked the clock again. He should have been there. He always arrived before the team, especially for emergencies this serious. The anesthesiologist stood at the patient's head, gloves on, already sweating under the pressure. "Her blood pressure is dropping fast," he warned. "We can't wait much longer." A junior resident flipped through the chart, her hands trembling. "We don't have another surgeon qualified to take this case. Dr. Turner is the only one trained for this specific procedure." That statement hung in the air like a sentence. In the hallway, the hospital director paced back and forth, running a hand through his graying hair as he tried to stay calm. His wife, his partner of nearly 30 years, was fighting for her life just a few feet away, and the one man capable of saving her was nowhere to be seen. The fear in his chest twisted tighter with each unanswered call to Dr. Turner's phone. He had always trusted Malik, trusted his skill, his dedication, his judgment. And now that trusted doctor was missing at the exact moment he was needed more than ever. Nurses traded anxious whispers, eyes flicking toward the entrance, as if expecting Malik to burst through the doors any second. But he didn't. No one could have imagined that while an entire team waited desperately for him inside, he was outside, handcuffed, kneeling on the cold pavement, pleading to be allowed in. Inside the hospital walls, they assumed he was delayed by another emergency or caught in transit. They had no idea he was so close, close enough to hear the faint echo of alarms through the glass, yet completely unable to reach the patient whose life was slipping away. Panic settled into the room like a shadow, heavy and suffocating, and still, the clock kept ticking. Back outside, Dr. Malik Turner sat on the curb with his wrists cuffed behind him, every muscle tight with frustration as he watched the hospital entrance, the same doors he should have already been through, grow farther out of reach with each passing second. His heart hammered not from the restraint, but from the devastating knowledge that time, his most valuable tool in surgery, was bleeding away. A few feet off to the side, a hospital security guard stepped outside for his routine perimeter check. At first, he didn't pay much attention to the officers speaking to someone on the ground. Situations like that weren't unusual near a busy medical center. But as he got closer, his eyes narrowed. The scrubs, the surgical cap, the familiar face, his breath caught. "Dr. Turner," he blurted, disbelief cutting through the air. The officers turned sharply at the name, confusion flickering in their expressions. The guard hurried forward, recognizing the surgeon he had seen countless times rushing through these exact doors during emergencies. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising with urgency. "He's one of our surgeons, one of the top surgeons. He needs to be inside right now." The officers stiffened, their certainty wavering, but still refusing to back down. "We had a report of suspicious activity," one muttered, though the words sounded less confident now. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the tension reached a breaking point. A nurse, still frantic over Malik's disappearance, glanced out of the glass entrance, searching for any sign of him. Her eyes widened when she spotted the commotion outside, the unmistakable outline of Malik in scrubs, sitting restrained on the pavement. She gasped, dropping the clipboard in her hands. "Oh my God, that's him." Within seconds, the realization shot through the corridors like a lightning bolt. The message reached the hospital director, who froze mid-stride when a trembling nurse whispered the words he couldn't process fast enough. "Sir, Dr. Turner is outside. The police have him detained." For a heartbeat, he stood completely still, shocked, horrified, disbelieving, before the weight of the revelation hit him with force. The man who was supposed to be saving his wife, the only man trained to keep her alive, was being held outside by officers who didn't bother to ask a single question. The director felt something inside him snap. Fear, fury, desperation, all converging into a single, blistering realization. If his wife died, it wouldn't be because the surgery was too difficult. It would be because the world failed to see Dr. Malik Turner for who he was. And now, he was done watching from the sidelines. He stormed toward the entrance, ready to confront the officers and pull back the man who could still save the woman he loved, if there was still time. The hospital director burst through the sliding glass doors with a force that made everyone nearby flinch. His face, usually calm, composed, and authoritative, was twisted into a look of pure desperation and fury. He scanned the scene quickly, and when his eyes landed on Dr. Malik Turner sitting handcuffed on the pavement, something inside him fractured. "What the hell is going on here?" he shouted, his voice booming across the entrance as he marched toward the officers. The two policemen straightened up, caught off guard by the intensity radiating from him, but neither spoke fast enough. The director stepped between them and Malik, his hands shaking as he tried to hold himself together. "This man," he said, pointing at Malik with a trembling finger, "is the surgeon who is supposed to be operating on my wife right now, the woman who is dying as we stand here talking." The officers froze, the color draining from their faces. Malik lifted his head, exhaustion and urgency etched in every line of his expression. "I told you," he said quietly, the pain in his voice unmistakable. "I've been trying to get inside." The director turned back to the officers, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. "You detained him? On what grounds? He's in scrubs, he has his badge, he works here, and you pulled him off the steps of the hospital while my wife's heart rate is dropping." The officers stumbled over their words, trying to explain the call they received, the report of someone suspicious, running near the building, but the director cut them off with a sharp, furious gesture. "Suspicious. He is saving lives in this hospital every single day. How could you not ask even one question?" The security guard stood nearby, shaking his head in disbelief, watching the officers' confidence crumble under the weight of their mistake. The bystanders, who had been unsure earlier, now stared openly, horrified at what had unfolded. One of the officers reached for the handcuffs, fumbling for the key. We didn't know," he said, voice cracking under the pressure. "You were just following a call without using your eyes or your judgment," the director snapped. "Because while you were dragging him to the ground, my wife was losing precious minutes she didn't have." The keys jingled as the officer knelt behind Malik, unlocking the cuffs with shaky hands. Malik flexed his wrists slowly, pain radiating through them, but the only thing on his mind was the patient waiting inside, the woman whose life still depended on him. The director placed a firm, steady hand on Malik's shoulder. "Go," he said, his voice breaking with fear and hope. "Just go, she needs you." And with that, Dr. Malik Turner rose to his feet and sprinted toward the doors, every second now heavier than ever before, while behind him, the officers stood frozen, battling the sinking realization that their mistake might have cost someone everything. Dr. Malik Turner sprinted through the hospital doors with a surge of adrenaline so intense it drowned out the aches in his wrists and the burn in his lungs. The hallways blurred around him, flashes of white coats, startled nurses, wide-eyed staff parting instinctively as he tore past them. He didn't stop to explain, didn't pause to apologize, didn't waste a single word. Every second was a life slipping through his fingers. As he neared the operating room, he could already hear the monitors screaming in rapid, frantic beeps. The sound hit him like a punch to the chest. He burst through the OR doors, and the surgical team looked up with a mixture of relief and panic. "Dr. Turner," a nurse cried out, breathless with the shock of seeing him appear as if resurrected from thin air. "Her vitals are crashing, she doesn't have much time." Malik didn't respond verbally, he simply moved. He scrubbed in faster than anyone in the room had ever seen, water splashing across the sink in chaotic streams as he worked. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from fury at the wasted minutes he could never get back. The anesthesiologist met his eyes over the patient's pale body. "We are losing her," he said quietly, dread weighing down each word. The director stood just outside the window, hands pressed to the glass, his face contorted with terror, grief, and the fragile hope that Malik could still pull her back from the edge. Malik stepped into position, pulled on his gloves, and took a steadying breath. The room fell silent except for the shrill, uneven beeping of failing vitals. "Scalpel," he said firmly. The nurse placed it into his hand, and then the world narrowed to a single, razor-focused moment, doctor versus death. Malik worked with a speed fueled by desperation and precision honed by years of experience. Every movement had purpose. Every second mattered. Sweat trickled down the back of his neck as he fought against the clock and the damage caused by delays he never should have endured. The patient's blood pressure dropped again, dangerously low. A nurse gasped. The anesthesiologist barked numbers that made Malik's heart twist, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. "Stay with me," Malik whispered under his breath, as if speaking directly to the woman on the table, as if his voice alone could anchor her to life. The director watched through the glass, knuckles whitening, whispering silent prayers no one could hear. With one final, decisive maneuver, Malik completed the most critical part of the procedure, his hands steady even as urgency pulsed through him like electricity. "We're not losing her," he said, whether to himself, his team, or the universe, no one could tell. The room held its breath as the monitors flickered, then steadied, then finally began climbing back into safe territory. A nurse broke into tears. The anesthesiologist exhaled a breath he had been holding far too long, and Malik, chest heaving, lowered his hands as the reality settled in. He had made it, barely, but he had made it. Behind the glass, the director's knees buckled in relief as tears filled his eyes. Malik had dragged his wife back from the brink, but the cost of those lost minutes still hovered heavy in the room like a ghost. The operating room was quiet now, save for the steady, rhythmic beeping of the monitors that finally signaled life returning to the patient. Dr. Malik Turner leaned back slightly, sweat dripping from his brow, muscles tense from the grueling fight against time. Every second outside, every moment he had been handcuffed and restrained, replayed in his mind like a relentless echo, but right now there was only this fragile victory. The surgical team, exhausted and overwhelmed, exchanged glances that carried the weight of disbelief and awe. The anesthesiologist wiped his forehead, muttering, "I thought we'd lost her." A nurse quietly sobbed, clutching the patient's hand, grateful that life had been wrested back from the edge of death. Malik's eyes, however, were fixed on the patient, scanning every line on the monitor, every subtle shift in vitals, every twitch or color change that could signal danger. After a few tense minutes, the life signs stabilized, gradually climbing back to safe levels. Relief washed over the room in a wave that nearly knocked everyone off their feet, but for Malik, the moment was bittersweet. He had succeeded, yes, but not without witnessing how a simple act of prejudice and assumption had jeopardized everything. The hospital director, now permitted into the room, rushed to the bedside. He grasped Malik's shoulders, voice cracking with gratitude and disbelief. You saved her," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You didn't just save her, you saved her for me." Malik shook his head slightly, exhaustion and emotion mingling. "We saved her," he corrected gently, emphasizing that this was never about one person, but a team, a mission, a calling. Around them, staff whispered congratulations, but Malik barely registered the accolades. His mind still raced, circling the injustice he had endured, the precious minutes lost, the officers who had failed to see the truth in front of them. And yet, despite the anger, despite the humiliation, he felt the undeniable pull of purpose that had carried him through every challenge of his life. The life of a patient, the heartbeat of a family, the unrelenting responsibility of a doctor to stand between death and survival. Outside the operating room, the world waited with bated breath. News of the incident would spread, questions would be asked, and consequences would come. But for now, inside this room, Dr. Malik Turner had done the impossible. He had transformed chaos and injustice into hope, life, and the quiet triumph of skill, courage, and unwavering dedication. By the time the news of the arrest and the near catastrophe inside the hospital began to circulate, the officers who had detained Dr. Malik Turner were facing scrutiny that they could neither ignore nor deflect. Internal investigations were launched immediately, their chain of decisions dissected line by line, every choice examined under the harsh glare of accountability. Footage from security cameras, witness statements, and hospital reports painted a clear picture. The officers had stopped a surgeon in the middle of a life-or-death emergency, acting on assumptions instead of facts, and their inaction in assessing the situation had endangered a patient's life. As the hours ticked by, media outlets picked up the story, sharing images and videos of Malik in handcuffs, juxtaposed against the frantic surgical team working to save the hospital director's wife. Public outrage was swift and vocal. Social media exploded with condemnation, demanding justice not just for the patient, but for the dignity and professional respect of Dr. Turner. The officers were placed on immediate administrative leave, their careers hanging by a thread. Colleagues within the department looked on in silence, some shaking their heads, others whispering questions about training, judgment, and systemic failures that allowed such an incident to occur. The officers themselves were forced to reckon with the gravity of their error. What had begun as a routine response to a suspicious person report had become a nationally scrutinized event, a failure with real consequences that went far beyond paperwork or minor reprimands. Guilt gnawed at them, not just for the humiliation they had inflicted on a respected doctor, but for the knowledge that a life had almost been lost because they couldn't pause, assess, and act with judgment. Their professional reputations were ruined, but the emotional and moral weight was heavier. Even after policies were reviewed and disciplinary measures taken, the officers would carry the memory of that day, the urgency, the helplessness of a patient teetering on the edge, and the stark realization that assumptions unchecked could have deadly consequences. Meanwhile, the world watched and learned a painful lesson. Authority without accountability can devastate, but justice and truth, when recognized in time, can restore more than life. It can restore the integrity of those who deserve respect. Even after the monitors stabilized, the cameras stopped rolling, and the media frenzy began to subside, Dr. Malik Turner felt no relief. The physical exhaustion from the surgery was nothing compared to the emotional weight pressing down on him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself handcuffed on the pavement, the officer's hands gripping his arms, the seconds slipping away while his patient's life hung in the balance. The adrenaline that had fueled his sprint through the hospital had left his body, leaving a gnawing ache of disbelief, frustration, and anger. He replayed every word, every gesture, every misstep of that encounter, questioning how a single moment of misunderstanding could escalate into a near tragedy. Yet, amidst the lingering resentment, he found a strange mix of pride and validation. He had not only saved a life, but he had done so under circumstances designed to stop him. Friends and colleagues approached him with gratitude, awe, and quiet concern, unsure how to bridge the chasm between relief for the patient and outrage for the injustice he endured. Malik spoke little at first, his words measured, carefully chosen, as if articulating the trauma might somehow make it more real. "It's not about me," he said finally, to anyone who would listen, voice calm but heavy. "It's about what we do when someone's life is at stake, how we act under pressure. How assumptions can become deadly." At home, late that night, he sat alone in his apartment, scrubs still draped over a chair, hands trembling slightly as the events replayed in his mind. Sleep was impossible, not because of exhaustion, but because the images of his patient's fragile body, the beeping monitors, and the officer's unyielding grip haunted him. He wrestled with a mix of emotions, anger at the injustice, grief for the lost minutes, and a lingering fear that such an incident could happen again to him or someone else. Yet through the storm of emotion, Malik found clarity in his purpose. He realized that this ordeal had revealed something about the world, about systemic bias, about the urgency of vigilance and compassion in every human interaction. He resolved that this would not break him, it would strengthen him. Every patient he would care for in the future, every hospital hallway he would run down in a crisis, every life he would touch. This experience had changed how he would approach them, more fiercely and more consciously. And though the scars of that day would remain, Malik Turner understood that the fight for justice and dignity extended beyond a single incident. It was a fight he was ready to face, with the same courage and dedication that had defined him long before he ever ran toward the hospital that fateful day. The story of Dr. Malik Turner's arrest and the life-threatening emergency quickly rippled beyond the hospital walls, igniting a wave of support and outrage throughout the community. Social media exploded with first-hand accounts, videos, and heartfelt messages, as people shared disbelief and anger at how a skilled, dedicated doctor could be treated like a criminal while trying to save a life. Local leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens alike expressed solidarity, demanding accountability for the officers whose assumptions had nearly cost a life. Rallies formed outside the hospital, where banners read messages of respect for Dr. Turner, justice for the patient, and calls to end systemic negligence. The hospital staff, nurses, residents, and fellow surgeons became vocal advocates, sharing their experiences of Malik's dedication and professionalism, painting a picture of a man whose life's work had been almost derailed by prejudice. Community members also reached out to the director's family, offering support and comfort for the emotional turmoil they had endured, recognizing that the incident had affected not just the patient, but everyone connected to her care. News outlets and talk shows invited Dr. Turner and hospital representatives to speak, highlighting the broader implications of the event, how a split-second decision, when driven by assumptions, could ripple into near tragedy, and how awareness and empathy could prevent such crises in the future. The narrative became more than just Malik's story. It became a symbol of resilience, accountability, and collective action. People from all walks of life shared their own stories of injustice and near misses, creating a powerful chorus of voices united in the belief that no one, especially someone dedicating their life to saving others, should ever be subjected to such humiliation. The community's response was both a shield and a beacon, showing Malik that while the world could be cruel and unfair, there were also those who saw, acknowledged, and championed what was right. For the first time since the arrest, a sense of healing began to take root, not just for Malik, but for everyone whose faith in fairness had been shaken by the terrifying events of that day. In the days and weeks following the incident, the consequences for both the hospital and the police department began to unfold with a weight that could not be ignored. Internal reviews, disciplinary hearings, and formal investigations scrutinized every decision, every action, and every misjudgment that had allowed Dr. Malik Turner to be detained in the first place. The officers involved faced suspension, mandatory retraining, and the looming possibility of permanent termination, while city officials struggled to respond to public outrage demanding transparency and accountability. Meanwhile, the hospital administration conducted its own internal inquiry, reviewing security protocols, emergency procedures, and communication channels, determined to ensure that no patient or medical professional would ever face such an obstacle again. Policy changes were implemented swiftly. Officers were now required to verify credentials in high-stakes situations, and clear protocols were established to protect medical personnel during emergencies. Legal actions were also on the table. Malik's legal team explored every avenue, from civil suits to formal complaints, ensuring that the ordeal was formally recognized as a violation of rights and professional respect. The media continued to cover the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about systemic flaws, implicit bias, and the urgent need for reforms in both law enforcement and institutional policies. Public discussions erupted, questioning not only the behavior of the officers, but the broader societal structures that allowed assumptions to override judgment, compassion, and common sense. Dr. Turner's case became a catalyst for meaningful change. Hospital administrators committed to staff safety, city officials reviewed law enforcement practices, and community leaders pushed for training programs emphasizing empathy, communication, and human-centered decision-making. Though the immediate crisis had been resolved, the ripple effects of that single moment of negligence transformed policies, attitudes, and awareness, sending a clear message that the actions of individuals, particularly those in positions of authority, carry consequences that can echo far beyond a single day, affecting countless lives, careers, and the very trust that binds communities together. As the dust settled and the story of Dr. Malik Turner reached the hearts and minds of the public, one truth became crystal clear: courage, skill, and dedication can overcome even the most unjust obstacles, but only when we recognize and act upon the value of every individual. Malik's experience was more than a medical triumph. It was a lesson in vigilance, empathy, and the dangers of assumptions made in haste. His determination saved a life, preserved the dignity of a family, and reminded the world that heroes often face the greatest battles before even reaching the battlefield. Yet, the incident also served as a mirror, reflecting the work society still must do to address systemic bias, hold authority accountable, and ensure that no one is hindered from performing their duty in moments that demand clarity and humanity. For those watching this story unfold, the message is clear: stand up for justice, speak up when you see wrong, and recognize the extraordinary in ordinary people. Life is fragile, time is fleeting, and sometimes the smallest moments of awareness can make the difference between tragedy and triumph. Here at Swift Tale, we bring stories like this to shine a light on courage, resilience, and the human spirit. If this story touched you, inspired you, or made you think, please do your part. Like this video, share it with others, subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge and inspire, and leave a comment below telling us what you would have done in Dr. Turner's place. Every voice matters, every story matters, and every life matters. Remember, the world is watching, but it is also waiting for people like you to act with empathy, awareness, and courage. Together, we can ensure that stories like Dr. Turner's are are celebrated not for the injustice he endured, but for the life, dignity, and hope that he preserved against all odds.